defense and we want 10% of the Sacramento County budget. People would say, get out of here, it's not our job. But what's happened in the past is there's been too much of the idea that, well, there's free money in Washington, D.C. Now, we are printing money faster than ever yet, and I'm very concerned about that. The great incentive for any government is to inflate their way out of debt. What do I mean by that? You got $14 billion, we've got we'll soon have $14.5 billion in overall national debt. One of the ways the government can get rid of it, a trillion, excuse me. One of the ways the government can get rid of that is to make it be less valuable. And how do you do that? You print more money. And I think we run the fear of doing that right now. Now, we've had briefings with Mr. Bernanke in which he said, hey, don't worry about inflation, we know when to pull back on it. And we said, look, Economics 101 would suggest if you print more money and the goods and services don't increase as fast as the money does, each good and each service is going to cost more money because there's more dollars chasing it. And he said, well, it's not the volume of money, it's the volatility of money. And I said, what's the volatility of money? Or the velocity of money, how volatile the velocity is. And it really is, how fast does it go through the system? So as long as it's not going through the system, it's not inflationary. Now when it starts going through the system, which is what we want it to do, it could potentially be inflationary unless they draw money out of it at that time, which in some ways defeats the purpose that you started with. So I'm one of those who believes that we do a disservice, particularly to our senior citizens, by printing money in this manner, because the dollar that's in your pocket, you're on fixed income, is worth less than it was the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before. I think we should stand up and say that's not the way to do it, and we ought to be responsible in terms of how we spend our money.
Just for the gentleman who said, I'm sure you don't want your grandkids to pay for it, but I'm sure you want them to be in the way of the devastation if the levee does break, so I think you have to rate both sides of it, not just one paying financially, but your safety also.
Then charge me, not my grandkids.
Anyway, so my question for you is, well, my question is I recently heard about Grover Norquist and his pledge, and I went online and I looked and I saw that you are one of many who's taken the pledge, and so I'm concerned with the fact that you've already taken an oath to office, your loyalties to the Constitution, your constituents, and if the Grover Norquist...
I don't take an oath that's contrary to the Constitution, never have, and please don't accuse me of that.
You didn't take an oath to the country?
I said I did not take an oath against the Constitution.
No, I said you already took an oath to the country when you were elected official.
Yeah, but I did not take a subsequent oath in contrary to that.
I don't know what you're talking about. You took a pledge to Grover Norquist.
Yes.
After you have taken an oath as an elected official to represent your constituents and this country. That's what I'm saying. So
Well, if your question is, do I want to increase taxes, my answer is no.
What I'm concerned about is if Grover Norquist's pledge goes along with the oath you've already taken for us, why did you have to take the pledge again? And if it goes against the pledge you've taken for us, how are we supposed to feel safe that you're going around taking pledges for everybody instead of just staying with the pledge to the president?
Yeah.
If you're surprised that I'm not for more taxes, then you haven't read the newspapers. I've never changed my position on that. I supported the tax cuts during the Reagan administration. I supported when I... I'll be happy to take another question.
Hey, we pay your salary, you better answer the question. I pay your salary for too long, sir.
Sir, don't threaten me. You want to be polite? You want to be polite?
We all pay your salary. Answer the question. No, only half of us do.
And the other half earn their right.
One vote in our
Representative Lungren, thanks for having the town meeting. Now, you said that the push tax cuts are for everybody, but you know, in reality, they disproportionately benefit the rich. Okay? Disproportionately. Goes to the top 2% of households with annual incomes of above $1 million. 97% of the benefits of these tax cuts goes to the 4% of the households making above $200,000. Now, I realize this is a controversy in this, but realize, in other words, rather than cutting Medicare, Medicaid, all these other kinds of social services, to restore some balance in the system by cutting those Bush tax cuts, okay? Or I should say rescinding those Bush tax cuts to give a more level playing field for, in other words, you know, say toward a more progressive income tax would actually be much more, fair for the whole populace. And I can't understand, in other words, why the youth is so opposed to that, and not recognizing that the benefits of these Bush tax cuts are actually benefiting the rich.
We're already seeing tax increases as a result of the passing President Obama's health care bill. I believe there's something on the nature of 50, ma'am, would you please, I don't interrupt you when you sit in the second row and all you're doing is interrupting every time that I'm saying something. No, I mean, it's just, I mean, this is, I've conducted town hall meetings where people have been courteous despite the fact they've had strong points of view. And this is really disappointing. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's very disappointing. Where we're trying to get people to discuss things in an intelligent way. And look, I understand the tactics. I mean, I've seen them before. And, you know, you might get on TV and you might have a reporter come over here. But if that's what we're going to do, maybe you should try and go to Doris Matsui's town. Well, no, she's not having a town hall. That's right. I'm holding a town hall meeting. And a lot of other members aren't holding town hall meetings. And I'm holding them because I thought we could get something done. I'll just say this. If you tax the super wealthy 100% of their income, you would not make a serious dent in the deficit we're doing. If you would look at the president's proposal is to increase taxes on the rich as defined as anybody making over $200,000, any family making over $250,000. 50% of those affected would be small businessmen and women who file individual returns. Now, if you think that's going to help get the economy moving, you're entitled to that opinion. I just happen to have a different opinion. And I would say, look at the state of California. We have raised taxes on the very rich. We have less money in our coffers. People can move. Capital can move. It happens to be a fact. You may not like it, but that happens to be reality. I'm trying to solve a problem. And, you know, John Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats. When he had one of the largest tax cuts in the history of the nation, starting with those who were the wealthiest and going all the way down to those who were median and lower income. He felt it worked. Actually, Bill Clinton cut taxes. Ronald Reagan cut taxes. I happen to think that those things actually work. We effectively right now have one of the highest corporate rates in the world, making it difficult for our people to.
That is not.
So that's one of the reasons. Ma'am, you had the first statement. You said you're going to be polite.
And you haven't answered the last few important questions. Answer the questions for real.
as I was saying,
I didn't when we first started. My fault.
I'm disappointed. I've been proudly talking about our audiences in the past about how we didn't yell and how we were courteous to one another, but obviously there's a new script here tonight. The point I was trying to make is that I support getting rid of a lot of the deductions and the so-called loopholes for corporations and for the richest, along with lowering the overall rate so that more will pay, and what they pay will be competitive with the world. And right now, we have done so many things that allow distortions in the system so that some people who should be paying more are not paying, not because of the rates, but because of the deductions and the distortions in the system. And I have supported that all along. The very first thing I would get rid of is the subsidy and tax credit for corn ethanol, which is the biggest scam. It not only makes no economic sense, but I think it's immoral. Because we have increased, I know that, but we have increased the cost of corn in the entire world. And there are millions of people around the world for whom corn is a staple of their diet. We have increased the cost to them. The cost of beef is up in this country in part because corn is one of the things used as a feed for cattle. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's a multi-billion-dollar payoff for those.
Yeah, what about big oil?
Well, that is Iowa.
I'm tired, I'm sure we're all ready to go home, but my name is Annette Hughes. My question is that we have the 8 wars in Iraq, 8 years of war in Iraq, on a credit card. And yet, it doesn't seem to be a patriotic thing to pay for it. And I think if we could work together, all of us as a team, the whole United States, and get that paid for,
That's right.
then we could solve some of these problems. So why can't we,
Freedom is not free.
why do we go to war on credit?
Well, I think one of the things we want to recognize is one of the priorities of the federal government. I think the first priority of the federal government is national defense. And I think for so many times we look at everything else for the federal government to do that may or may not be their responsibility, that we lose sight of the essentials. So while I think that there is some waste in the Defense Department, I don't think it is the major target of cutting in our overall budget. I will say this in terms of going after fraud and abuse on the Defense Department. I'm one of those who's led the fight to restore and then strengthen what's known as the Lincoln Law. It was a law passed during the Civil War and signed by Abraham Lincoln to penalize those people who were selling defective goods to our military. And we set up a system whereby they could be sued by individual citizens acting on behalf of the United States, and then those citizens get a portion of the recovery. So it's a way of incentivizing citizens to do that. Very, very effective through World War II, and then in the Truman administration, his Secretary of Defense thought it was too tough on the defense industry, and they repealed it. When I was in Congress in the 1980s, I worked with the Democrats to restore that, and Ronald Reagan signed it, so that we once again had that to penalize those people who would defraud the federal government in the defense industry. And then about 4 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision that said that you could go after those who were direct contractors with the Defense Department, but you couldn't go after subcontractors. And a lot of the fraud that we found with those defense contractors who were defrauding the government in Iraq were subcontractors. So I worked with my Democratic counterparts to pass legislation that was signed by the President that allows us to go after subcontractors, not just contractors. So I have supported and led efforts to try and ferret out that waste and abuse that may be found in the defense establishment. But having said that, I happen to think we need to figure out exactly what our overall strategy is, our strategic needs in this country, make that very explicit, and then determine what is required to support that. And I'm afraid in some cases we haven't done that. And that's why I think the Congress ought to be brought in at an earlier stage when a president is committing our men and women to combat. And I think there ought to be an ongoing and serious collaboration with the Congress on that. And I'm hopeful that that will be resumed in the future. Okay, I know we supposed to be out of here. We were supposed to be out of here in a couple more minutes. Let me just, okay. Well.
Hi, thank you for letting me have a chance to ask a question. First of all, I'd like to just voice a couple of concerns. As far as the tax versus, I don't think we have a taxing problem, we have a spending problem. I don't criticize you, but I do think that you were wrong in your recent debt vote because you basically gave them a credit card to do more spending. It's like when the kids, if you got a kid that has a gambling problem, you don't give them an increase in their allowance so they go gamble more money. Right now you're talking about a bill that had a baseline budget, which means that they're actually increasing.
So instead you throw grandma out.
To increase their spending and they've accounted for that, which means any cuts aren't really a real cut, it's kind of fuzzy math. And there was a bill, the Connie Mack penny plan, that worked from a zero baseline budgeting that would have been excellent. And I also want to ask, why is it you gave away our rights? We have a super committee, it's called Congress. Why are you electing 6 or 7 people to be a super Congress that we have no choice in electing and decide and whether or not they're people what they decide? You didn't elect any powers, I'm powerless. I don't understand why you did that. And I also like to just ask one more quick question too. The Connie Mack plan, excellent plan. I'd like you to address that if you know anything about it or look into it. And I also would like to know, when are we going to address the 800-pound gorilla in the room that everything this man in the office does is illegal, including whether or not he's supposed to be
First of all, I have profound differences with the president, but I don't think that he is illegally elected.
You're aide that admits that everybody on the Hill knows his first is not
Well, okay, first of all, I have not questioned the legitimacy of the president's election. I disagree profoundly with most of his policies and will continue to do so, but I don't question his legitimacy as being our president. Secondly, I would just disagree with you in terms of what the vote on the debt ceiling increase was. It was not extending the credit card, it was paying the credit card bill that has been sent to us because of prior spending. And I just happen to think it's irresponsible not to pay your bills. I mean, I happen to believe that very, very profoundly. So you and I have a disagreement on that. And with respect to Connie's plan, I haven't gone on to Connie's plan, but I've been talking about zero-based budgeting for 20 years and think that it's the best way that we ought to do something. That is, you justify from $1 what you're going to spend as opposed to justify what you spent last year. But since we do projections in terms of spending based on baseline, I've been working hard to reduce the baseline from which the projected spending goes, and that's one of the reasons why we have spending cuts now rather than 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. We had this room until 5 minutes ago, and I want to thank you all for being here.